Hey there, moms in timeout and timeouts for moms. I'm joined today with a guest speaker, Laura Rotter. We're going to talk about all things finance, which is definitely a hot topic, especially these days with the market the way it is. And I get questions all the time, financial questions. And I say, I am a personal trainer and wellness coach. I am not a financial planner or strategist of any kind. So I'm happy to have you today, Laura. Let's dive in. How did you get to where you are today?
I'm so excited to have this conversation, Sarah. And I guess after hearing your intro, before I answer your question, I want to say that I sort of think of myself in some ways as a wellness coach for finances.
Mhm.
Um, and that's an sort of an introduction to how I got into this work. I had a previous career for quite a long time working on Wall Street. I invested money for institutions, not for families, but for larger organizations. And I would say that the first third of that career, I was happy. It was really interesting work and it paid quite well. And
Mhm.
then in the middle of that career, I was raising three kids who I often say were around the same age. For they joined my family in slightly different ways, each of them, and it was a very, very busy household. But by the end of my career, the last third, I was pretty miserable. The people in the career had changed, the work itself had changed, and it took me a bit to extricate myself. And it really was my wellness journey, finding mindfulness practices, finding meditation and learning to lead meditation, finding yoga and doing a yoga teacher training that had me sort of wake up one day and realize I was choosing to be a victim of my life. And if I was no longer happy in the work that I was doing, I was the one who had the ability to make a choice to do something different. Like I said, it took me quite a number of years to act upon that realization. Um,
Mhm.
and when I thought about what did I want to do when I left Wall Street, there were a number of things I explored. I thought of becoming a yoga teacher. I had taught my friends in my home. And I decided that the universe, I'm going to say it that way, the universe didn't have me learn financial concepts, develop a fluency with numbers, money, financial markets to throw it away.
Mhm.
And I decided that starting my own financial planning practice would be a way perhaps to teach the yoga of money.
I
Um,
love that. And I love that you incorporated something that you're like a newfound love in the foundation that you have. I think a lot of people think like a career change needs to be this like overwhelming, throw everything out the window and start fresh kind of thing. But I love that you incorporate the mindset and the gratitude that I read about, that you talk about with your clients into the work that you do now. Because it's fast. You don't necessarily think about that when you think about financial planning in money in general.
yes. I mean, we all grow up with these messages from our culture, and as I'm saying this, I'm still in the same culture, so I don't want to pretend that now it's easy for me, but the message is that happiness is outside of ourselves, that if you just get that raise, or if you just get that role at the next job, if you get that bigger home, if you buy that nicer car, then you'll be happy. Um,
Mhm.
and I've come to learn that I didn't coin this phrase, but happiness is an inside job. Um,
Mhm.
the people I come in contact with, I'm looking at you, Sarah. I'm thinking about the moms who are listening to this. We're all blessed. We have roofs over our head. We can afford medical care. We have food in our pantry. And
Mhm.
we have the choice to wake up each morning and say, okay, what do I get to do? Or what I did for a lot of my life and what we sort of unconsciously fall into, which is like, where's my
Absolutely.
to-do list? What do I have to do? And
Mhm.
so communicating that to myself and continuing to have practices that make me aware of that, I use that attitude to create a safe space, what I even think of sometimes as a sacred space, for
Mhm.
people to come to me and talk about their money, which is not an easy thing to do. And to ask them questions about their goals, their values, their lives, and to explore those
Mhm.
questions in a safe space, and then to look at their financial resources and use those resources towards achieving those goals and sort of actuating those values, if you will.
And it sounds like from what you speak about, it's not about like just save, 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 and wait for that retirement piece and then live. It's like we have to live now because the future is not guaranteed for any of us. And when you're in the weeds of having little kids, and like mine are 6 and 8 now, so I'm kind of in a sweet spot. But a lot of the moms I work with are like have infants and toddlers and are just like the exhaustion is real. It's hard to imagine thinking about putting one more thought in your head about the future or like financial planning. But what would you say to the moms that are listening of like where to start? Like where if you're someone like a lot of women come to me and are like, "Are you saving for college?" And I'm like, "Yes, we've been saving for college since our kids were born. It's not much, but every little bit adds up." And they're like, "Well, how do you even start?" So you have like that college piece, but you also have that like, yes, you'd like to take care of your children, but you also want to make sure that you're set up also for the future. So where
Yeah.
do moms like maybe that haven't done anything? Where's a good place for them to start?
That's a big question, and I
Mhm.
have a relatively simple answer. Similar to you, Sarah, people come to me and there's a lot of anxiety around money and the sense that it's something, you know, too big to understand and complex. And the simple starting point from my point of view, and that I did when I changed my life, if you will, and walked away from a career that, was quite lucrative, was okay, sit down and look at what's coming in each month and what's
Mhm.
going out each month. And I'm going to take a step back and say that can be really scary, right? Most
Mhm.
of us put so many of our expenses on credit cards or on
Mhm.
automatic, and we don't pay any attention.
Mhm.
And because of that lack of clarity, there's just a lot of fear. So the first
Mhm.
thing to do is to look at what's actually deposited in your bank account each month, right? We know, if we're working, we often have round numbers of what our salary is, but actually what comes in after taxes, after whatever retirement plan contributions you're making, whatever, healthcare contributions you're making. So what actually comes in each month? And
Mhm.
then start looking at what actually goes out each month. The easiest place to start with that is the stuff that's automated. I say the same thing to all my clients, which is pretend you lie in bed each month, like you don't leave your house. You're still
Mhm.
going to end up paying your mortgage or your rent, your electric bill, your cell phone bill, Netflix. What is the same amount pretty much each month that's going out? And make a list of those things. It's easy enough to look either at your credit card or your bank statement, and just sometimes you'll even find things that like, oh my God, I'm still paying for that. I haven't used that in years. But
Mhm.
make that list. And then ideally, that's not more than half of what's going out each month.
Mhm.
Because if it's more than half, you don't have anything left over for fun. People I know that look, I live in the New York area. It's one of the most expensive places to live. If you buy too much house, if you rent too much an apartment, then you feel like, I don't go out to eat. I don't buy many things and I'm choking. So the first
Mhm.
thing is to understand what's going out, and over time making changes so that you've committed to only half of your paycheck, and then a third of your paycheck can go to fun, can go to going out with your friends, can go to seeing a movie, to go to buying a new pair of shoes. And then ideally, another 10 to 20% can start going towards savings. And
Mhm.
I'm saying it that way because, look, you know, 40 years old is relatively young. You have a lot of whoever's working, you or your spouse or both of you have a lot of your earning years ahead of you. And I
Mhm.
would say that's your greatest asset. So at a time when you've got young kids, you have expenses ahead of you that are going to change over time. Don't put a big burden and expectation on yourself. I'm probably not the only one that has said, if you're working, at least put enough away in your retirement account to get the match, because that's free money. And if your
Mhm.
employer is, offering you free money, take it. And put $5 away, put $10 away, have the paycheck, put some in savings and some in checking. If it's not in your checking account, you're less likely to spend it.
Mhm.
And don't stress. You have a lot of years ahead of you to earn and continue to put money in savings. But the
Mhm.
most important thing, and this comes back to my mindfulness training, be mindful of what you're spending. Don't beat up on yourself for what
Mhm.
you're spending. In the same way, if you try to meditate, you're not going to beat up on yourself that thoughts keep coming in your head, because that's how we're wired. But just start the process of clarity and looking
Mhm.
at what's coming in and what's going out.
And that's a whole mindful activity in itself, whether it's just you or you and your partners sitting down, and that can be intimidating. I know, quarterly we try to look at like have things shifted, what has changed, and now that our kids are in school it's a little bit different because there's no preschool expenses and a bunch of things are taken out and the extra daycare expenses. But when you sit down and you look at it, whether it's on the computer or on piece of paper, it's very eye-opening where the money is actually going. And like you said, you could find things that are auto paid on things like subscriptions, like Hulu. Like maybe you haven't watched Hulu in months because you forgot you even had Hulu. That happened to us. We're like, oh, we signed up for a trial, and then oh, look how sneaky. It just kept charging, kind of thing. So sitting down can be intimidating, but it doesn't need to be like a big long project. It can be like 30 minutes. That's what I tell moms. I'm like 30 minutes, 2% of the day. Sit down with your partner, especially whether one's earning or both are earning. It's important that both people know where the money is going and how much is
Yes.
coming
Yes, and I want to acknowledge two things. First of all, when I've had these conversation with my kids or my
in.
nieces, the answer I get, and I understand it, right? Like, people do specific tasks in couples. I mean, I will speak about my own couple. My husband has absolutely no interest. He often will joke that he married me to balance the paycheck, and it's hard to get him interested.
Mhm.
So but I would repeat what you said. It's important at least to have the conversation, and that one person isn't the only one who knows what's going on. And the other thing I want to acknowledge is that we all grow up with different money stories. And
Mhm.
that can make it harder. And that too, I like to talk about my own personal experience. I grew up with a dad who, in the way he acted and the way he spoke, the message was, it's important to be happy. Like, who cares about money?
Mhm.
He would go, it wasn't great for his finances. He would go from job to job to job. He was a photographer, he was a salesman, in search of happiness. And that was one message. My father's parents were sort of depression babies, and a
Mhm.
completely different message. His father was an academic who, when he started a family, left to be an insurance wholesaler. Like, that message was, you do what you can to support your family. So you can
Mhm.
imagine that we didn't really jive financially.
Mhm.
And understanding different messages that we get growing up, so that you're not pointing fingers at each other like you're wrong or you're wrong.
Mhm.
If one has a tendency to spend and one has a tendency to save, or one is more frugal, we're different people. And the most important thing, again, is to have, this is true about relationships in general,
Mhm.
right, Sarah, which is communication is the most important thing.
Absolutely. And Laura, that was gonna be my next question. What if you do have someone that one's a saver and one's a you got to be happy kind of thing? I'm lucky that both of us grew up savers. Like both our parents saved money. They both planned for the future. But I know that's not always the case. A lot of times it's not the case. So what advice do you have? Just that keep that open line of communication. The non-finger pointing is tough. I can't imagine if I was with someone that was spending all this money and I'm the planner and the saver of things. How do couples deal with that?
So one thing I've learned from the work that I do, Sarah, is every couple deals with their money differently.
Mhm.
I actually met with these clients. They've been with me for years yesterday, and I told them, I always share your story. They're married with three grandchildren. They're married for over 35 years, and she
Mhm.
grew up poor, and
Mhm.
he didn't. And so they have separate finances. Um, she was a teacher for many years, and she would struggle through the summers like, oh my God, I don't know that I have enough money in my bank account. I would say, like, I think your husband will lend you some money if you need some. But he didn't want to be constrained because she had so much fear around spending money that if he would go and buy, nowadays they're not expensive, go buy another flat screen TV, a bigger, she would freak out.
Mhm.
And they had the money. So what worked for them was to not share their finances. I thought it was a little insane, but that worked for them. So
Mhm.
I know I don't take for granted that everybody shares their finances. Perhaps there's a household account and then separate accounts. You have to figure out what works for you. Um, Again, I'm not sharing that he would spend money frivolously and it wasn't good for the family. They had adequate money. He was spending appropriately. And
Mhm.
so, like I said, you have to figure out what works for you. And
And once again, it comes back to like the mindset. Her mindset growing up and is ingrained in her that you don't spend this money. You save and save and save and make sure you have enough for the summers as a teacher. And for him, that wasn't his mindset growing
right.
up. And it's got to be hard to shift those or to change those or to kind of morph into a different part of you that is comfortable with money. I see it with friends that grew up in, not so great situations and that now have money. And I feel they go one extreme or the other. They're still saving and they never spend, or they spend lavishly because they've never had it. And now they're saving nothing because they never had it. So now they're spending things on fancy things. So it's funny the mindset shifts that happen when you come into money if you've never had it. And I'm sure it's the same, the opposite. If you've always had money and then all of a sudden there's scarcity on what that does too.
Right. Like I said, there's different money personalities, and I don't know that they ever change. And
Mhm.
that's where the clarity comes in, which is when you actually see, I mean, it's interesting. I have a mission statement. I'm going to read it because
Oh,
it's
please do.
meaningful to me. Um, and my mission statement is to educate, enlighten, and encourage others to be present to what actually is and not the story of what is, so that they can make choices with purpose.
Mhm.
So when you actually see the numbers, as we're discussing, Sarah, if you think I'm entitled, I can buy whatever you want, and then you say, well, actually, the way you're spending, you're just about breaking even,
Mhm.
maybe you should pay more attention to not walking into a store every time there's a sale.
Mhm.
Um, you may still go ahead and do it, but you'll know that you're making a certain choice. But
Mhm.
if you don't have the clarity, then you're only acting on emotion
Mhm.
and not making educated choices.
And isn't that so true about so many aspects of life? Like we tell ourselves these stories or these kind of behind the scenes run in our heads because of our experience, because of what's happened in the past. And it's not necessarily actually what is happening or what actually could happen. It's just this kind of made up storyline that we start to believe once you tell yourself the same thing over and over and over.
Yeah, it is fascinating, right? We create our own reality. And
Mhm.
then, right, we've all done those exercises where, like, we're told to watch one thing. And so we completely miss the video where there's a gorilla and like we don't even see the gorilla. We look for what we're told to look for. We have
Mhm.
confirmation bias. And
Yep.
so, frankly, but that we could go down a rabbit hole about that. We think we're living and seeing reality, but
Mhm.
we choose what we filter what we see and what we don't see. And
Yeah, the
everybody-
psychology behind all of it is fascinating to
yeah.
me. So you have a podcast also. Tell us
Ah,
what you dive into on that.
so I started a podcast a little over a year ago. I think I'm getting to my 80th episode. It's called Making Change with Your Money.
Mhm,
I myself went through a big life change when I left Wall Street. I was the primary breadwinner of the family. I
mhm,
shook our marriage up for a bit. We're in a good place now. And and I just became aware of other women that were making similar, well, actually, I was going to say making similar choices, but sometimes the choices are made for us. Um,
mhm,
whether it's, loss of a marriage,
mhm,
other things that happen that suddenly you have a big life transition and money. I often say, again, I didn't coin this phrase, but when life changes, money changes, and when money changes, life changes. And
mhm,
so I found it helpful to meet other women who had been through it and came out the other side.
mhm,
I now, I guess, count myself in as part of those women. And so I interview women who've been through a big life change. And it's not only about money, it's learning about the choices they made and how that helped them
mhm.
um, come through it. So I just enjoy getting to know other women. I often say I work with dudes on a trading desk for quite a long time. And I really enjoy being in the company and having conversations with other women.
Mhm. That's fantastic. I'd love to listen to more of those podcast episodes because it feels like a lot of times when you go through these big changes, you think like, why me or only me? And it's got to be so nice for your listeners to connect and be like, oh, I went through that also, or something similar that you can relate to. That's what I find the joy in podcasting is so fantastic that there's someone listening that like needed to hear that today.
Yes. And I also am happy to hear I know some of the women I've interviewed actually have gotten clients from being
Mhm.
podcast guests. So that's a nice feeling for me that I've helped others grow their business. And like we just said earlier about creating our own reality, it's interesting because we look back at what happened to our lives and we create meaning. It's important to us as humans. We're meaning making machines, if you will. And so then to look back at what transpired and to see how others have created meaning out of their journey helps us
Mhm.
see the meaning as well.
Absolutely. Not only like learning from what we're going through, but seeing what other people have gone through. And I love when I meet people that are like just ahead of me or just behind my journey, and you can relate to it so much. And it's nice to see what the future could be, if especially if you're in one of those tougher transition periods of life.
Yes, it is comforting to know you're not alone.
Oh, I'm so happy to have this conversation today. How can people find you? Where can people reach out if they have questions or they just want to learn more about working with you?
Thank you so much for asking. So I named my business, I always loved this. I called it True Abundance Advisors.
Mhm,
With the thought that abundance is so much more than just, the money that's in your bank account.
mhm,
And I still remember talking to a cousin, a physician, who said, I don't understand what you mean by true abundance. And I said, David, you're not my target market. So you
I
can
love that.
find me either on my website, True Abundance Advisors, advisor with an O.com. My email address is Laura, Laura, at trueabundanceadvisors.com. And I'm always happy to talk. I offer a 30-minute complimentary call. And as I said earlier, always interested in meeting other women who may be at a transition point in their lives, which has them more comfortable speaking to a stranger about their finances, which is not an easy thing to do.
And sometimes it's definitely easier to talk to a stranger about it versus starting that tough conversation with a family member. I'll
That
put a
is,
link
that's
in our
true.
show notes too, and I'll link that. I love that you offer that free 30-minute consultation. I'll put that in the notes too so people can click and book that.
Thank you.
Of course. Thank you so much for the chat today. It's so nice to connect and thank you for giving us that mindset shift for our money issues that seem so overwhelming, but you kind of made it seem so doable that it's just like little decisions here and there can result in big changes in the future. So much
Yeah.
like your wellness journey. And I love that you're a yoga teacher as well. It's like an added bonus.
Yes, my pleasure, Sarah. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely. Have a great day.
You too.